With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Okay, so we're diving deep today into the comedy podcast. Comedy Bang! Bang! Wanted to understand just what made it stand out and, what kind of impact it's had. And we've got a few descriptions of the podcast itself to work with.
Awesome.
So let's get right into it. Comedy Bang! Bang! Debuted on May 1st, 2009, and it's hosted by Scott Aukerman. The core concept seems to be this really interesting mix of, celebrity interviews, but then they throw in these improvised character performances.
Right.
And it's that blend of, the real and then the totally made up that I think sounds really cool right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that tension that's so interesting. You've got this sort of standard interview format that gives you something familiar to latch onto.
Right.
And then all of a sudden just gets completely flipped on its head with this injection of the absurd, and it kind of just throws everything off in this really fun way.
Totally. And, speaking of that, our sources really point to this absurd and surreal humor as the main thing driving the show.
Yeah.
And it's fueled by these recurring characters and running gags. So for you listening, it's important to picture a show that wasn't just, going for those one-off laughs. It was really building this kind of bizarre comedic universe over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Using these recurring bits and characters.
Exactly.
And it's almost building this kind of inside joke with the audience.
Totally. And it's those recurring elements that I think are so important in, cultivating that really dedicated listenership.
Yeah, totally.
Because it gives you a reason to, to keep tuning in.
Mm-hmm. You get that sense of reward for sticking with it,
Exactly. You get to see how those characters and jokes evolve.
Right.
And, it becomes more than just telling a joke. It's something way more layered and involved.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where it gets even more interesting. Comedy Bang! Bang! Wasn't just some niche hit. The descriptions we have call it instrumental in popularizing the comedy podcast genre. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
What do you think made it so influential, especially back in those early days of, comedy podcasting?
Well, if you think about the bigger picture, Comedy Bang! Bang!
Yeah.
Kind of came along at this time when a lot of comedy podcasts were still trying to figure out what they were.
What they were supposed to be.
Exactly. And by really playing around with the format, this whole interview improv thing, it gave people this really compelling alternative to the more traditional approaches, just recording stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
It showed people what audio could actually do in comedy.
And it's clear that experimentation resonated with people.
Yeah.
Because, the fact that it attracted a really wide range of guests from the comedy and entertainment industries suggests that it kind of got this reputation as this place where, even big names were willing to kind of go with the flow and embrace the unexpected.
Right.
It gave it a certain, coolness.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that willingness of these really well-known guests to just jump in and play along with the characters, and that whole absurd atmosphere, that probably really broadened the show's appeal.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just for the diehard comedy fans anymore.
Yeah.
It had this mainstream appeal because of the celebrity factor, which I think then exposed a wider audience to this more unconventional humor.
Exactly. So the impact of Comedy Bang! Bang! Wasn't just, limited to the audio world. The sources we have mention a television adaptation that aired on IFC from 2012 to 2016.
Wow.
That's a pretty big jump. What do you think about how that audio-first style of comedy translated to a more visual medium?
Oh, it brings up this really interesting question about, what the core of the humor is.
Mm.
So much of Comedy Bang! Bang! Relies on these really specific vocal characterizations and the listener having to use their imagination to, fill in the blanks.
Right.
And I think the TV show had this real challenge of, how do we actually visualize these characters and scenarios that are often so bizarre?
Right.
Without, losing that original spirit of the comedy.
Exactly.
And the fact that the show ran for several seasons suggests that they found a way to capture at least some of that essence.
Yeah.
Even if it was a different experience than the podcast,
Right.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the strength of the comedic foundation of the show and the fact that it's still considered a staple in the comedy podcast scene, even now with its innovative format and influence on comedic podcasting, really tells you something about its lasting legacy.
Absolutely. It wasn't just some, passing fad.
Yeah.
It seems to have really shaped the landscape,
Yeah.
inspiring other comedy podcasts to try these
Yeah.
more character-driven and experimental formats.
So, for you listening, this deep dive into Comedy Bang Bang really shows how a really creative and kind of unconventional format, this blend of structured interviews and then completely spontaneous improv, can not only find this really dedicated audience, but also have a huge impact on an entire genre of audio entertainment.
Right.
It shows how powerful it can be to think outside the box in audio.
What's really fascinating to me is how powerful it can be to combine things that seem like they don't go together at all. Like the interview structure provides this familiar anchor, but then the unpredictable improv just injects this surprise and absurdity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this unexpected combination that seems to have been the key to its success.
Totally. And it makes you think, considering this blend of the planned and the completely off the cuff and Comedy Bang Bang, what other seemingly contrasting ideas or formats could be brought together to create something totally new and surprisingly, compelling in audio or even, beyond?
Right.
Definitely something to think about.